There are many questions that have been evoked by this fascinating outlooks into the fields. So, who would like to ask Roger some questions? Well, I'll venture a small one just to get things started, because I think it's there are many things in here that I find fascinating, but maybe one of them is really how in practice to bridge these things. When you create music, it's sort of simple. Everything is allowed in some sense. When you're analyzing, you're setting up an experimental, perhaps an experiment about how music is being perceived. But then, when you want to use that knowledge into the next creative act, there's something that has to go on within of accepting that knowledge to change one's own earlier liberty. You say something about that transition that happens.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if one takes the case of symbolic music, which has relatively simple symbolic representations like MIDI notes, and the comments would apply both to what I do with real-time software developed with Geraint Wiggins and Marcus Pearce, and it would apply also to Omax and some of the major earcam outputs. Then you can, if you wish, have the model which goes into the software be one which has been derived from the ongoing process, and you combine that with a model such as derived from the previous cognitive studies, because they can be expressed in a similar form. So wherever that bit of mathematics applies, you can have them interact with each other, or one replace the other, and it can be multi-dimensional. Multiple variables can go in simultaneously: pitch, velocity, duration, And so it's relatively easy to see how, once you've got a model, whether it's a purely statistical one or a cognitive one, you can feed it in. I think it's more tricky when you come to the continuous audio, and again, Omax tries to address this, but when you come to the continuous audio and trying to plug in the cognitive model, then they tend to be expressed in very different mathematical forms. And so there is a practical issue of how to use them simultaneously or how to use them interactively, but the principle's the same. So I guess I'm saying there is a huge jump. You're simply making an assumption that that model is going to be useful and you're trying it out as a source of music, or you're just using the statistical model of the music per se and saying, I'm going to continue and I'm going to allow that statistical model to evolve as new data comes in, new performance is made.
Would you say that is only possible when you're dealing with essentially symbolic music?
No, I wouldn't. I'd just say it's more difficult. And I was trying to address your question as how do we think about this relationship? Seeing that relationship is more complex with audio, but I think the same arguments still apply.
But there's much to be yet discovered in there, for example.
Oh yeah.
Perceive and segment.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted you kind of briefly talked about this valence issue, likability or dislikability.
Yes.
And you said it's hard to make judgments about that.
No, I said it's hard to model it.
Hard to model it. Can you say more? Because it was just a brief part. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yes.
The issue of valence.
Yeah. Well, first of all, with just about any piece that's been studied, the magnitude of valence change responses across a piece is rather smaller than those of arousal. In other words, people perceive valence as being less variegated across pieces than they perceive arousal. And then what people perceive as being the valence of a piece is more dependent, it seems, upon their particular psychological makeup than is what people perceive as the arousal profile of a piece. And one of the reasons I think that the models are so bad is that we're not measuring the right parameters, which might be on the perceptual path to it. And so my only remote hope idea at the moment is that people not only differ in the degree to which they can be absorbed in something, and this is called there is a psychological scale called the absorption scale, and there's a intelligence scale, and there's a musical engagement scale. But John Sloboda put this idea to me, and I developed it, and I think it's potentially useful. Perhaps what's happening is that valence is a reflection of the degree to which, moment to moment, people find themselves engaged. And if they cease to be engaged, then their valence response is correspondingly flat. If they are engaged, it may be negative or minus, but it'll be significantly varying. And so I'm hoping that we've developed a continuous measure of people's perception of engagement. I'm hoping this may turn out to be informative. But like I say, at the moment, it's not very impressive.
Hard to model. You kind of answered the question almost in John, but on this continuum between a completely autonomous generative system and a system that you control the parameters of, and finally the actual instrument, how do you feel? What do you feel playing? Do you feel changing parameters of an algorithm, a generative process, or do you feel like playing an instrument?
Well, I think I'm probably the kind of improviser who finds purely acoustic improvising to be not just playing the instrument, because I'm quite well aware of some of my limitations in playing the instrument, even though I work quite hard on it. But I don't view it primarily as that. I think I do view it more as controlling a generative process which is much longer scale than the immediate events. And so, given that I think that way about playing the piano, I think that's necessarily probably much the same way that I think about twiddling parameters in the max patch and getting events to happen a long way away. In fact, I have some max patches that I really like working with, which I just set go when I'm playing with them. And they do things at times that I don't know, and they have a repertoire, of course, but quite a variable repertoire. I have no idea what it's going to do or when. And I find that interesting, somewhat, as we were saying earlier, in the way that you do when you play with somebody whose range of responses you're not familiar with and you can't anticipate.
Yeah, that's another point on that continuum, kind of
Yes.
system
Yes.
reacts or not.
Yes. I think that's probably a personal kind of psychological question as much as anything. At least that's the question I'm answering, I guess.
You're not on the side of, or rarely on the side of pure generativity, where everything is determined and modeled in advance, and you just say go, and that's...
Oh, I have no objection to that, and I have things that run like that. Definitely, I find that interesting too. But
it's rare to be someone to be completely generative. Even Xenakis.
Yes.
In the end, he always changed it.
Tweaked it.
A few
Yeah.
things in the score.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I think I'm guilty of the same. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Roger, and let's give him a hand for. Our next keynote speaker is going to be Demo Schwartz, and that's fine.